all 60 games. And again, these are the bye teams that didn't participate. I believe it was the Southeastern Conference and the Sunbelt that didn't have a single bye team. I think also the Pac-12 when you think about it, because there's only 2 teams. But yeah, these are the bye teams. As we will start with Conference USA like we have been doing lately. We'll go Conference USA to the ACC. And in between all that. So the games that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday, Liberty, well, they did us right. They barely beat New Mexico State 30-27. That looked like the Aggies were going to get that one on the road in Lynchburg. But the Flames don't flame out. 30-27 again there. A game I was super disappointed to see the end result. Didn't get to watch any of it. FIU goes to Bowling Green, Kentucky and beats the Hilltoppers 25-6. With this game's results, it ultimately eliminates Conference USA from any contention in the college football playoff. We know they didn't really have much of a chance, but we kind of had to bring that up because that was kind of what happened this past weekend. Again, the Panthers win 25-6 over Western Kentucky. Another one where I was disappointed in my pick because I thought Sam Houston State was going to get their first win this past week. But on Wednesday, they lose to UTEP 35-17. A little bit of a close game to begin with. But UTEP, who's made a quarterback switch there on offense, looks like that switch is working out. As again, they win 35-17. The final game, which we got right, it was a bit of a cockfight between Jacksonville State and Delaware. The Blue Hens lose to the Gamecocks 38-25. And this put Jacksonville State in pole position on top of the Conference USA standings, which we're going to show you guys for the first time here on the channel this season. And there it is. The current standings. We're going to be doing it now after we do our conference by conference recap. And Jacksonville State is there on top. Kennesaw State, after the Tuesday results, were in first place. But once the Gamecocks got their game in, they moved into first place. And we'll see how the rest of the season cracks on. And we'll keep track of the standings for CUSA. Let's keep moving to MAC. Some MAC Nation football here. Only got one game wrong. This is one of our decent conferences that we picked this past week. The only game we got wrong, Central Michigan. I believe this was a Saturday morning game. Chippewas beat Bowling Green 27-6. We thought the Falcons, especially at home, also favored by a decent amount of points, would have got the job done for us, but they disappoint. Not only did they not cover, but to lose to, I think, to an inferior team, because again, Bowling Green just beat Toledo. But yeah, they can't beat Central Michigan. It is what it is. 27-6. It's a game we miss here. Game we didn't miss. Miami of Ohio beating Eastern Michigan 44-30. Eagles just did not want to go away whatsoever. I just saw highlights of this game on social media. Yeah, the Eastern Michigan, a team that you just can't really put away. They're just going to come at you drive after drive, no matter what, even if you're on top by multiple possessions. A team that didn't come back whatsoever after getting scored on, Kent State. They head to Toledo, Ohio. They play the Rockets, and they lose 45-10. Toledo bouncing back after a rough couple of weeks, to be quite honest with you. They lost to Bowling Green last week in that rivalry, but they bounce back and get on track here in 2025 with a more of a guarantee win there against Kent State, 45-10, as they beat the Flashes. Next up, we have a game that somehow ended in just a weird set of circumstances. I believe Buffalo threw an interception at the end of this game, and then somehow, some way, they got the ball back. Yeah, it was crazy last minute between Buffalo and UMass. But the Bulls win 28-21. One of the most disappointing results because the Bulls were favored by 17 points. They absolutely don't cover. But that kind of isn't surprising. Not that this game is usually close, but UMass just showed up there. Not that they're getting any better. They are just they're all right for a MAC team. It looks like. We'll see how the rest of the season for the Minutemen is handled. As this might be one of the closest games left on their schedule for the conference, but we'll have to see. 42-28 is the result between Ball State and Akron. Got that one right. The Zips, well, they didn't get completely zipped up. Took a little bit of time, but Ball State ultimately gets the win there at home. As we keep moving to the final game, Ohio, they beat Northern Illinois 48-21. Bobcats actually covering this one. Ohio was favored by 12 points. So yeah, that's more than enough between 48 and 21 there. Disappointing game. And I'm not too sure if it was last week or the week before against Ball State. It was a close game. I was kind of worried that this one would turn out to be that as well. But Northern Illinois didn't really show up. And that's why Ohio ultimately won there. Here are the standings for the MAC conference. Buffalo, after this weekend, are now in pole position, which is pretty nuts because I wouldn't have expected them to see they're in first place. You got Miami of Ohio, Western Michigan, who hasn't played here in week 8, still undefeated. Those three. Ball State, Central Michigan, Ohio, with 1 loss is there. Toledo, they basically need to win out if they want to play for a MAC championship in Detroit later this season. But those are the standings there for the Mid-American. So we keep moving. Looking at the Sunbelt now. It was a rough weekend for us here in this conference. Didn't even start off well as well because Arkansas State goes over to South Alabama and beats the Jags 15-14. I don't know what South Alabama is all about right now, but it ain't winning for sure. I mean, they played teams earlier this season that have been way better. Some of them ranked better conferences, but when they come up against a foe, I guess they play usually every season, can't get the job done. As they drop 15-14 loss to the Red Wolves at home. One game we got it right. 37-14 Troy on the road against UL Monroe. They handle business against the Warhawks. And yeah, I can't really complain. I was a little worried about this one compared to the ones that we got wrong, because I was like, actually Troy, they're looking better than 2024, as it's kind of been a reshuffle since they lost their head coach. But yeah, bouncing back, getting a nice win here. We'll look at them probably in the standings when we finish this. Going to Coastal Carolina, heading over to Appalachian State. Chandler's beat the Mountaineers 45-37. A little bit of surprise with this one. App State was favored by 10 points. Obviously, they don't cover and they lose. So close. Just a little disappointed. I mean, even before I looked at the line on this, I was like, yeah, I'm going App State. They've just been the better team. Coastal Carolina, decent. But again, these conference games are so tricky sometimes because some teams show up. And Coastal Carolina did that this past weekend. One team that did as good and was probably the biggest game in the conference this past weekend, Old Dominion versus James Madison, the Royals rivalry, I think is what they're calling this. The Dukes win 63-27. The closest line out of all these games, but couldn't have been the farthest. -1 for the Dukes going into the matchup, and they more than cover. In fact, they would have covered by quite a bit. But great win for them. Definitely would have been a disappointing loss if he would have went down to Old Dominion. And I think that loss to Louisville looking a lot better as the season is going on, because it was only two possessions and it was pretty close there against the Cardinals. So James Madison, pretty good. Still pretty good. Not pretty good. Texas State, they are completely falling apart here. And most likely will not be playing for a Sunbelt Championship later this season. As they lose, I believe this one was in overtime, to Marshall, 40-37. The Bobcats were favored by 3 points. They obviously don't cover, and they do us dirty. Marshall, this win, very impressive over Texas State the week before. They blow out Old Dominion. It's a complete flip of the coin the last 2 weeks of what we've been seeing earlier this season from the Thundering Herd. And I'm here for it, I guess, as we continue through our L's this past week. Southern Miss versus UL Lafayette. The Raging Cajun lose 22-10. Also the favorite team going into this matchup. Southern Miss. Just yeah. We shouldn't be surprised. They played Mississippi State pretty decently earlier this year. It was just some games after that week where like we went with them and then we got it wrong. So it was like the mistrust we had with the Golden Eagles. I guess we got to start trusting them, as the last couple of weeks we've been getting it wrong when Southern Miss plays. One we got right, and we'll end on a high note. Georgia State heading over to Georgia Southern. The Eagles win 41-24. And yeah, this matchup is usually this kind of result, and we're kind of glad that it continues to be that kind of result. As we'll take a look at the conference standings here. Scroll down to the Sunbelt, Funbelt. Here is the standings. You got James Madison there in first place in the East. Coastal Carolina and Marshall with 1 loss, and looking like they will be challenging to represent the East. And then in the West, you have Southern Miss and Troy there in first place, and then Arkansas State in first, and a disappointing 0-3 Texas State, as they have completely collapsed in conference this season. But those are the standings for the Sun Belt, as we keep moving through the games. Next up, we have the Mountain West to talk about, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. We only got one wrong here. That was the Friday night game between Utah State and San Jose State. The Aggies win 30-25. This was a nice back and forth contest between, again, the Utah State Aggies and Spartans. Just coming up short on the road there. Looked like they were going to come out on top, but Utah State had a couple drives there at the end to win 30-25. Nice bounce back win for Utah State. A close game between Air Force and Wyoming. The Falcons win 24-21. It was like one of the first weekends where I was able to actually do one of the unique helmets that the Falcons pull out every so often, as they were representing the U.S. Space Force. That's why there's a USSF there. But close game. I believe they also call this the border war between the two. And we get it right, 24-21. A game that we talked about in the rank section. Boise State blowing away UNLV late 56-31. Go Broncos. That's all I got to say there. Hawaii, they went on the road to Colorado State. This is just some stuff that I just don't understand of why Colorado State's being favored sometimes, and then when they're not favored, they win. It's kind of just a weird kind of trend that I've been noticing for the Rams. As I think it was last week, they had a weeknight game against Fresno State. They were the underdogs. They win, and then I think it was Washington State, and then there's another game that Colorado State played where they're favorites, and then just like this Hawaii one, I was like, yeah, there's no way Colorado State's gonna beat Hawaii. Like, Michael Alejandro is too legit for the Rams to handle. Proven right, 31-19, and yeah, I mean, at least they got to rock these cool little Ram logos with the little beanie this past weekend. As we continue through it, New Mexico, they played Nevada and win 24-22 there in Albuquerque. They don't cover. The Lobos were favored by 10, but I think it should have been a close game. Nevada trying to get a win here in the Mountain West Conference. I don't think it's going to happen. And maybe they have one or two opponents that may be feasible, but probably not. For the Lobos, you know, playing decent football. They're finding ways to not lose. And yeah, 24-22. They're in Albuquerque again. The final game, Oregon State gets their first win of the season as they hosted FCS opponent Lafayette there in Corvallis. This game, I was a little worried because the Beavers, I believe, were down 13-10 at halftime. But they made the right halftime adjustments and ultimately win 45-13, and they actually cover, as they were favored by 22.5. Oh, sorry, before we move on, I got to show the standings, and those standings are right here. Boise State is now in their rightful place, first in the Mountain West Conference. There's no doubt about that. San Diego State 2-0, as they're also undefeated in conference play. And right behind them, you have some one-loss teams in Hawaii, UNLV, Fresno State, and Utah State. We'll see how the rest of the season cracks on. A lot are already assuming that UNLV will play Boise again later this season. We'll have to wait and see. There's still a lot of football left to play. But basically, the Broncos are the team to beat in the Mountain West Conference, as it will be their final season there. But we got to keep moving. Now into the American, one of the best conferences in the country, I would say. And let's start out with the weeknight game between East Carolina and Tulsa. The Pirates win 41-27 there. And if my math is correct, I believe they also covered. They were favored by 17 points over the Golden Hurricanes, who have not been very good this season. I can't forget that Tulsa lost to New Mexico State there in Santa Fe. I think the previous season, they also lost to a Conference USA team in Louisiana Tech at home. So yeah, there's no reason why you would pick Tulsa against much of anything here in this conference. Tulane, talked about them in the rank section. They hosted Army and won 24-17. The Green Wave were favored by 9.5 points, at least the last time I checked going into it. Had to put up a decent fight against the Black Knights, who brought somewhat their A game. Was probably more like their B to C, because they lost obviously 24-17. We'll see how the rest of the season cracks on for the Green Wave, as they are now in some decent contention as Memphis loses their first conference game of the season, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Temple headed over to Charlotte, North Carolina to take on the 49ers. They blow out the poor old 49ers 49-13. The Owls were favored by 12 points. They absolutely covered there. Another game we got right, North Texas hosted UTSA there in Denton, and they blow out the Roadrunners 55-17. Beginning of the week, this line was set at 5.5. It dropped down to 4. Ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. UTSA had no chance in this game, as North Texas bounces back after losing to USF at home, and still somewhat in the hunt to possibly playing for a conference title later this season. A team that disappointed us, and I believe is the biggest upset of the weekend, that is between Memphis and UAB. Tigers were favored by 21.5 points. Yes, 21 against UAB on the road. And the Blaze, after losing their head coach Trent Dilford, win 31-24. And they stop Memphis there on a goal line drive to hold on and again pick up that big win this season. This team has been struggling. Earlier this season, I remember looking at the scoreline between them and Alabama State. I was like, oh man, UAB is going to be in trouble this season. And somewhat right about it, but obviously getting this big win after you firing your head coach, a lot of positives, but unfortunately we get it wrong there. The final game here in the American to talk about is Florida Atlantic at South Florida. Yeah, the Bulls win 48-13. Belt to cheeks for the Bulls against the Owls. It's the usual kind of scoreline we see between the two, as USF was favored by 22 points. Yeah, they more than covered there for sure. As we're going to take a look at the American Conference and the standings here in a few moments, as I'm turning it all on for us. Here are the standings after week 8. You have 3 undefeated teams in conference: Navy, South Florida, and Tulane. The Midshipmen are the only undefeated team overall in the American left. Everyone else really at the top, there's 1 loss. And then you have Memphis losing their first conference game. North Texas, East Carolina also only has 1 loss. And then Temple too, who is kind of a bitter surprise. They have been improving week after week. They took Navy to their limits there at home last week. And we'll see if they stay alive, as those are the standings for the American after week 8. Now we keep moving into the Atlantic Coast Conference, and yeah, it was a bad weekend for us, very bad weekend. But I'll take 2 of the losses that we were handed to us, because Miami and Florida lost. Okay, so I cannot grin at those. Or not grin at those, if you know what I mean. Anyways, let's talk about that Friday night game. Some people will probably say the biggest upset. I would say the second biggest upset this past weekend. Louisville goes to Hard Rock Stadium. They beat the Miami Hurricanes 24-21. Miami was favored by 13.5 points. And it was, a bad night for Carson Beck. Bad night for that defense. And yeah, the ACC doesn't really have a legit team, even though Georgia Tech is undefeated. But who has the Yellow Jackets beat? No one so far this season, to be quite honest with you. Anyways, Miami, they get their first loss of the season. That's why we kind of have not put them in the top 5 whatsoever. I think the highest we put them was in at number 8 or 9. Oh, maybe 7 actually, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless, we've been moving them just in that range of 7. We moved them back to 10 after this past weekend and just had no trust in them. And we kind of proved ourselves right of why we shouldn't have trusted the Hurricanes whatsoever. They were not a top 10 team. We keep moving to now Cal hosting North Carolina on a Friday night game. This one was super close. Super close. Tar Heels almost got their first conference win of the season in the Bill Belichick era. Don't know how long that's going to last. Regardless, the Golden Bears, they hold on to win there in Berkeley. They were favored by 10 points. They obviously don't prove that right, but at least they get the win. As Georgia Tech keeps winning some way, somehow. Remember a couple of weekends ago, they were taken to the limit against Wake Forest. They've ever since have had close games in conference, and this one was a bit close. They kind of pulled away at the end. It was an interesting line because Duke was favored going into the weekend, and this one actually flipped. Originally, I went Georgia Tech, and then I flipped to Duke because I was like, let's have some fun. Well, it wasn't much fun, to be quite honest with you, because it got it wrong. It is what it is. We'll take the L. We're trying to make up some difference, and unfortunately, we did not. We put ourselves into a deeper hole. UConn, this was also a bit of a surprise. They beat Boston College 38-23. If I would have said, or if you would have told me UConn's going to beat Boston College, I was like, okay, well, probably a close game, right? Well, no, not so whatsoever. Bill O'Brien, in his tenure over there in Chestnut Hill, man, it has been a bad time. They have just been getting handled by everybody they've been coming up against, and it's not improving whatsoever. I have all the coaches that are going into their second season. He might be one realistically where he's just going to be gone, and he's going to have to, go probably back to the NFL if he wants to continue coaching. Because at the college level, as a head coach, it's just not working whatsoever. And that's why they lose to UConn 38-23. We get to one where I was happily right, because Clemson was favored by 9 points. They hosted SMU there in Memorial Stadium. The Ponies win on the road and get one finally over Clemson 35-24. Talking about a coach that might not be with this program for much longer if this continues. Yeah, Dabo Swinney not off to a good start. This team has completely collapsed. Completely, especially at home. You've now lost to LSU, Syracuse, and now SMU. Like Florida State, at least they'll for sure get a win there in South Carolina, it looks like. Regardless, SMU, they're still looking alive there in the Atlantic Coast Conference somehow, some way. We got Washington State, who took Virginia almost to the depths. The Cavaliers were favored by 17.5 points, and no one in Vegas has learned their lesson when it comes to the Cougars out of Pullman, because they barely lost to Ole Miss last week. 24-21 this week. They play Virginia there in Charlottesville, and Virginia had to pull some tricks out of their bag to ultimately win 22-20 there. I was kind of looking at that game just in the corner of my eye. I'm like, there's no way Virginia is going to lose this game. How? And when I finally saw that final score, I was like, whew, I was a little happy. I was like, man, I'm losing a lot of games this week. This is one I kind of don't want to lose, and we got it right. But at the end of the day, one that we also got right, Pitt versus Syracuse. The Orange have completely also collapsed since they lost their quarterback, Steve Angeli, when they beat Clemson there on the road. That was why Pitt was favored by 11.5 points. That's also why they win 30-13. It's kind of just no surprise, very obvious of why Syracuse has been struggling as of late. And they're going to continue to struggle because they didn't have a backup plan if Steve Angeli was to go down, or yeah, is good to go. I mean, I would kind of thinking about it, like if he didn't enter the transfer portal, like Syracuse would have been really, really bad. They probably would have got more annihilated by Tennessee earlier this season, and they most likely would have not beaten Clemson. A game that just ended before we went live here tonight. Stanford. I don't want to call this an upset because Florida State has been awful this season. Last week they lost to Pitt at home. Well, they go to the West Coast, to Palo Alto, and they lose to the Nerds 20-13. The Seminoles were favored by 17.5 points. That was a bigger spread than Miami, Louisville. And they don't get the job done. Man, Mike Norvell hasn't won an ACC game in a very, very long time. And we'll see if they get that win this season with him in charge. I would be very surprised if he is still the head coach there in Tallahassee, because it has been an experiment the last 2 seasons, or season and a half, where it doesn't look like it's working or getting any better. You got to be able to prepare yourself against Stanford, Pitt, with the amount of talent that Florida State has had and has been putting in the resources for. It's absolutely embarrassing. Embarrassing. I mean, it would be even worse if you're a Florida State fan, to be quite honest with you. But that's the state of Florida at the moment. You got USF better than both of these programs, really. I know they did lose to Miami, but like the lack of preparation. Take your every opponent seriously. Like you can't take these programs and put them into the top tier because they're nowhere close to it. This is not the 80s. This is not the early 90s, early 2000s for Miami. They're just leaps and bounds away from that. And it's been showing this season as they both lose here in week 8. Let's check out the standings for the ACC conference. So I only got to scroll down a little bit for this one. In first place, Georgia Tech. They're the only undefeated team, and they have been rolling. Got out alive there in Durham as they pulled away against the Blue Devils and Virginia. Virginia is the number 2 team in the conference. That is absolutely insane. Also undefeated in ACC play so far is SMU, who will, I would think, out of the top 3 right there, they are my guarantee to get into the conference title game. They just got to continue to win. I would have to look at their schedule. I'm forgetting who they have left, but I think it's pretty decent treading, especially after beating Clemson. For them again to get to Charlotte to play for that ACC title, and Florida State, they're done. They're out of it. Miami, obviously, they got their first loss of the season. I kind of want to see the Hurricanes. And when they play outside of the state of Florida, like how much worse is it going to be for the Hurricanes? And do they bounce back? Duke, Pitt, Louisville, Cal are also 1-loss teams so far this season. And those are the standings for the Atlantic Coast Conference. So we have a few more. We're now into the Big 12. Only 6 games to talk about. Here are the final scores for this conference. Let's start with Houston hosting Arizona. This was an early kickoff game. This is one of the few ones this past week where the line shifted. The Wildcats ended up being the favorites by the end of the week, but Houston, to start off on Sunday or last Sunday, they were favored by 2.5. So it was kind of like a little bit of a coin toss of who was going to win. We went with Arizona, who technically were not the favorites, and then it flipped. A close game. Houston still alive there in the Big 12, even though they have the 1 loss. Arizona kind of knocking themselves out as they lose another one in the Big 12. And a little disappointed. They would have had the 2 losses because they lost last week to BYU in overtime. They got blown out by Iowa State, and then this one just like ultimately kicks them out of any kind of lifeline to compete for a Big 12 title. But it is what it is. Willie Fritz doing a great job there for the Cougs. We keep moving to TCU playing Baylor. This one we unfortunately got wrong. We went with the Waco Bears, who we thought would have shown up, but the defense, we kind of get why people are saying they don't play good defense there in Waco, especially on the road in Fort Worth. It is what it is, 42-36. They try to mount a comeback. This offense was just not good enough. As I would continue to UCF hosting West Virginia, they blow out the Mountaineers 45-13 in Rich Rod's second tenure there in Morgantown. Not off to a good start for sure. One we talked about in the rank section as one of the upsets this past weekend. Arizona State host Texas Tech in Tempe. They get one back on the Red Raiders. They're 26-22. Slowing down Tech really in the second half. You know, the Red Raiders, fastest scoring offense in the first half. I believe they only had 19. And they were basically scoreless up until the end of the game there, where Arizona State had to come back on a drive to get 226 points. And Sam Levitt led his team along with the running back, I think it was Raleek Brown, who scored the game-winning touchdown. And then Jordan Tyson had a big play to lead up to punching it in there for the Sun Devils. And yeah, they're somewhat still alive for a Big 12 title. Another one, the Holy War, that we unfortunately got wrong. Utah heads over to Provo. Close game. Nice back and forth after halftime. Boy, was this a physical game as well. There's a lot of hits that Dampier and Bear Bachmeyer actually took. I would say more Dampier in the pocket. And sometimes when he scrambled it, it was just like a little worrying in some of the hits he took. And then Bear Bachmeyer actually took a hit where a player was disqualified because of targeting. But BYU wins. They just made the bigger plays. Utah shooting themselves in the foot by going for it on fourth down way too many times and failing in BYU territory. We move now to the last game, 49-17. Cincinnati blows out Oklahoma State there in Stillwater. Bearcats were favored by 22 points. Yeah, they more than covered there against the Cowpokes. We're going to take a look now at the Big 12 standings. And those look like this. BYU still on top as they're undefeated in conference and overall. One loss. Overall, Cincinnati also undefeated in the conference. Bearcats, they might be playing for a Big 12 title at the end of the season. Who knows? Arizona State, they are one loss. Two losses overall. Texas Tech, they were handed their first loss from the Sun Devils there. And then Houston, who we just talked about in the beginning of the Big 12 games, one loss as well. Some of the two-loss teams, I would say like Iowa State has a decent chance. I think Baylor, Kansas State, pretty much out of it. I would also consider Utah in that mix. I'm surprised Kansas only has two losses there in the Big 12 as well. Regardless, we'll have to wait and see on how this all cracks up and who will be playing in Arlington for that title game. We got to keep moving to the second to last conference to talk about. That's the Big 10. We only got two wrong here. Let's start with that Friday night game that was an absolute disappointment in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Golden Gophers beat Nebraska 24-6. Matt Rule, what are you doing? What? No offense whatsoever. You're also favored by 8 points. You don't even get close to even trying to cover that. And Minnesota just played great defense. Kind of what they're known for. If your offense can't finesse them, then like you don't have a good offense, and that's what we saw out of the Cornhuskers that are on the road. So that was one of the few ones we got wrong for the Big Ten. One we got right, Michigan hosting Washington. This was one I was afraid of in this conference that I was going to get wrong. UW, yeah, they just couldn't hang in there, and that's another consecutive loss to the Wolverines. This season, last season, season before, in the championship game, which seems like such a long time ago now. But yeah, Wolverines keep rolling there at home. Northwestern, they host Purdue, and they shut out the Boilermakers 19-0. Yeah, I wasn't expecting a shutout, but Northwestern playing some great football as of late. A big win last week in Happy Valley. Have they lost the Big Ten championship game? Well, we're actually going to see that at the end of this, when we go through this section. Ohio State, they went over to Madison, Wisconsin, and played the Badgers and also shut them out 34-0. Yep, another weekend where the Badgers don't score a single point. This should be the final weekend for Luke Fickell and the Buckeyes, playing great defense as they usually do. Michigan State, they went over to Bloomington, Indiana, and lost the Hoosiers 38-13. And if I'm not mistaken, Indiana doesn't cover there. They were favored by 27 points. And if my math is right, that's only 26, just on the edge. Michigan State, in that first half, made it a bit of a fight, but in the end, Indiana pulls away. One that was an absolute blowout before halftime. Oregon there against Rutgers, 56-10. The Ducks were favored by 17 points. Yeah, that one was for sure going to be covered, as it was. And they bounced back after losing to Indiana. Penn State loses another game this past weekend. They are now, I believe, winless in conference. They go to Iowa City, lose to the Hawkeyes 25-24. It looked like they were going to be able to bounce back after getting rid of James Franklin, which I thought was the wrong move to do. If anything, you just hold on to Franklin and then, part ways with them at the end of the season. Let it play out. But yeah, you lose your starting quarterback, you lose your head coach. You're just going to have a bad time. And that's what happened this past weekend. Also, Iowa was technically favored only by 3 points. They don't obviously cover there. This game was a little bit of a game we mentioned that in the offseason that could be, just a tough game for the Nittany Lions, and it ended up being that way, as again they lose. But again, we didn't really expect all the circumstances that kind of went into this game to happen, and ultimately, again, Iowa gets one over Penn State there. We got it right, but one that we didn't get right. Maryland on the road in the Rose Bowl. This one we went against the grain. UCLA was favored by 3.5. Yeah, they obviously. I think that's considered not covering, because half a point. 20-17 is the end result. Maryland had a field goal to tie this game 17-17. Left a little bit of too much time on the clock for Niku Iamaleava, who drives the ball down, sets up a game-winning field goal to kind of walk it off. I think there was like 2 seconds left on the clock. And UCLA somehow, someway are rolling. Win here against Maryland, win against Michigan State and Penn State. Only one loss so far this season. I believe that's to Northwestern. And ever since they made that coaching change, everything has been falling the right way. And we'll see if they continues as though there will be some more interesting games. I'm really hoping they beat USC this season, because that's just more fun for me. Speaking of USC losing, they lose to Notre Dame in South Bend 34-24. Notre Dame was favored by 9.5 points. Oh yeah, they covered. I was saying over on the Degenerate Takes chat, as they were also doing previews for college football, and I was like, yeah, USC doesn't stand a chance. They lose by 2 possessions. Almost that. Notre Dame, we're definitely not going to lose this game. USC, not a legit team. They never were a legit team. You lose to Illinois, you lose to Notre Dame. You know, what other teams are you going to lose to this season? Probably Oregon, hopefully UCLA. Can't wait till you play Ohio State, probably next season. You get blown out there. And continue to be just in the Big Ten. Never going to be able to compete for Big Ten title as long as Lincoln Riley is there. And we'll see if one of my preseason predictions come true, because I don't think he's going to be the USC head coach by the next season there in 2026. But we'll have to see if that comes true. As the conference and what it looks like in the standings, let's take a little peek over there. As Indiana on top, undefeated in conference play, also undefeated overall, along with Ohio State. Oregon probably still in contention to try and defend their Big Ten title. They just have to hope Ohio State or Indiana loses later on this season, as not all in their control. They still have some decent speed bumps they got to deal with there for the Ducks here in 2025 still. Northwestern, that was the one I was saying. I was like, where are they in the standings? Well, they're 3-1 right behind Oregon. That is just absolutely nuts. USC right behind them. Trojans most likely lose a couple games in conference play. Same with Iowa right behind them. Michigan, only 1 loss so far this season. That was to USC. So maybe, they would definitely have to beat Ohio State. That's probably what Oregon is hoping for as well. Then UCLA, only 1 loss, and that's to Northwestern. Everyone else after that, yeah, they're basically, I would say, out of contention. If you're losing 2 games in the conference, you're definitely not going to be playing for a conference title. It's really the teams with no losses, 1 losses, that will be in the mix. And we might have some kind of weird tiebreaker at the end of the season, because realistically, probably Indiana and Ohio State go undefeated for the rest of 2025. But even if one of the team loses there, it's going to be an interesting way of how they settle who plays in Indiana for a Big Ten title. But again, a lot of football left to be played here. And we got to keep moving to the final conference, guys, and that's the SEC. And yeah, only these games to talk about. So let's start with LSU and Vanderbilt. 31-24. Commodores overcome the Tigers at home. Really rare occasion where Vanderbilt is favored by 2.5 points, and they prove it right. LSU just struggling on offense. No offensive line really, especially in the tackle positions. In terms of protecting the quarterback, can't really run the ball. There's too much of an overemphasis on trying to pass it. I understand Garrett Nussmeier is back there, but when you have a young offensive line that's struggling in the perimeters and protecting the quarterback, what you need to do is take a little bit of pressure off of them by running the ball effectively. They cannot do that whatsoever, and that's why they continue to lose in the SEC conference. 31-24 there on the road. Oklahoma, they squash out Cocktober and beat the Gamecocks, who we picked this past week. We really wanted it to happen. We wanted Cocktober to at least start this weekend. It looks like it might not go off whatsoever, because they got to play Alabama next week, and that'll be the last time South Carolina plays in October. 26-7 there. John Mateer bouncing back after losing in the Cotton Bowl. Texas A&M they beat Arkansas 45-42. Get out alive there in Fayetteville and continue to be undefeated. Not continuing to be undefeated, Ole Miss, they lose to Georgia 43-35. The Bulldogs, they just wanted it more there in Athens, and ultimately that's why they beat Ole Miss and hand them their first L. Mississippi State, they went down to Gainesville and almost do the job and almost prove us right. Florida was favored by 8.5 points. We did not believe in that whatsoever. We know that there's certain weapons that the Bulldogs out of Starkville have, and yeah, they took Florida to their limits. There are murmurs that this might be the final weekend for Billy Napier, even winning there at home. I guess it's just not good enough when it's Mississippi State, who's actually a decent team. They've just been playing better teams so far this season, and yeah, they continue to lose in the Southeastern Conference. But Florida staying afloat there in Gainesville, 23-21 again. A game that went to overtime. Texas in Lexington, 16-13. Longhorns just survive. Their defense just holding on to games by threads at this point. Their offensive line just non-existent, it feels like. That left guard position, massive hole. I think in the Red River rivalry, they had to start a true freshman. And that's just an area that they're just being exposed in. If you can't run the ball in the Steve Sarkisian offense, you're just not going to be able to move the ball whatsoever. It doesn't matter who's at quarterback. It doesn't matter who you have out wide. If your offensive line can't play at a top tier position or a top tier level, like, you're just going to have to win nail biters. And that's what we saw this past weekend there in Lexington, as again, Texas barely gets out alive against Kentucky. Alabama beats Tennessee in the third weekend in October. Once again, we have a great matchup, somewhat, even though it was mostly all Alabama. They were favored by 8 points. Tennessee maybe should have had a touchdown, so it could have ended 37-27. Definitely was a lot closer throughout. It just mostly was Alabama being ahead. But again, ultimately they win 37-20 there in Tuscaloosa. The final game to talk about for this past weekend is Missouri versus Auburn. This game went to double overtime. It was a missed field goal at the end of a regulation where Eli Drinkwitz thought he had it through the uprights. It was no good. Gave that lifeline to the Tigers, but unfortunately in double overtime they lose again, 23-17 there. Let's take a look at the conference here for the SEC in terms of standings. It'll be the final one we look at here. Texas A&M is at the top, at the tippity top of the Southeastern Conference. It's kind of weird to see. They are undefeated overall and undefeated again in conference play. Alabama is the only undefeated team left as well in conference play. They have just the one loss to Florida State earlier this year. Georgia, one loss. Ole Miss, one loss. Texas, one loss. That was to Florida. Missouri, they lost to Alabama. Oklahoma, they lost to Texas. And then Vanderbilt, well, they lost to Alabama. And that's how I kind of, the Crimson Tide are up there, and then they should be moving themselves, I think, into the top 5 after this weekend, to be quite honest with you. Anyways, that is going to be basically it, as those are the standings again for the Southeastern Conference. As